This is the TBS Tango 2. And if you own this radio, there's like 4 things that you might complain about. The screen's not real big. Maybe it doesn't have as many buttons as you'd want. There's no way to put an external module on it. Like if you do have a few 2.4 gigahertz quads left that you want to fly, you're just out of luck. And it only goes up to 250 milliwatts. And today we're going to fix 2 of those things. Today, we're going to swap the main board on this guy, and it's going to give us the ability to install this module adapter on the back that will let you use it with a 2.4 gigahertz module. And if you've got the V3 main board, it's going to let you turn your Crossfire up to 500 milliwatts today, and maybe even as much as a watt in the future if TBS decides that that's safe. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. The first thing we should do before we tear into the Tango 2 is ask which version of the main board is currently in your radio. If you ordered before April of 2020, roughly, you probably have the V1 main board, and you'll need to upgrade to the V3 in order to take advantage of any of this. If you ordered between approximately April and August of 2020, you probably have the V2 main board. The V2 main board does have this connector here, which lets you connect to the external module, but you'll still need to do some of the modifications at the end of this video in order to actually install this module bay. And if you ordered after approximately August of 2020, you probably have the V3 main board, which has both the connector for the external module bay and the higher output power. But again, you're still going to need to do these modifications at the end of the video to get the module bay. But this is a V1 Tango, so let's tear it open. And the first thing we're going to do is remove these rubber pads on the side. And they just peel off. Next, with a 1.5 millimeter hex driver, we're going to remove 6 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And kudos to TBS for using a hex driver and not Phillips head, as many vendors would done. Hex is life. I mean, some people would say Torx is life, but let's be reasonable. Having done that, the 2 halves of the radio will separate, and the back of the radio will lift off and come free. Next, we're going to disconnect the battery. And by the way, if you ever do get your radio locked up and need to unplug the battery to hard reset it, this is how you have to do it. The battery is fastened down with dual lock fastener, so just pry that loose gently and it'll pop right off. Next, I'm going to disconnect all the wires and so forth from the main board. We've got a ribbon cable here. It looks like it just pops off. It is taped down here, so let's just be careful and remove that tape very carefully. Could probably reuse that tape. We've got a plug right here. And then it looks like we've got 12 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 screws holding the main board down. So I'll go ahead and take those out. The next thing we're going to do is lift the main board out. But before we do that, we need to disconnect the UFL connector for the external antenna. It's held on with this little rubber thingy, and it passes through this little notch in the circuit board. So we're going to, it's actually really clever. There's a lot of really thoughtful and clever design that went into this radio. Yeah, I don't want to stress the UFL connector or the coax cable, so I'm going to see if I can just loosen up this rubber retention piece and maybe pull that out from the far side. Yeah, there we go. So that's, pull that out. And then we're going to pop this off carefully. There we go. Oh, does it pass through there? Oh, wow. I see, it passes through there. So we're just going to pull that out entirely, like so. And then we can lift off the main board, free, and it'll come off with the gimbals. The next thing to do is to pull off the caps of the 2 position switches. The 3 position switch caps are connected and will not come off. The roller will pull off like so. And the gimbals, and this is the cool, this is so cool. I was so impressed when I saw they did this. The gimbals do not actually have an electrical connection to the board. They just lift right off, and like you could just change the gimbal without any soldering or unplugging, which who would have thought you'd ever be doing that? But then here you are. Last thing to do is to get the SD card out. It's held in with this capped on tape, and you could just slice that tape, I suppose. I'm gonna see if I can pry it up with like a flathead screwdriver. Oh, it's a Kingston 16 gig card. Usually on these radios, you'll get some no-name brand 1 gig card that is just crappy and dies, and I recommend replacing it. That's a name brand freaking 16 gig card. That's, again, kudos TBS. Next, we'll reinstall all this stuff on the main board, the V3 main board. Should probably tape that back in. Now, I happen to have some capped on tape. You may be able to reuse the tape that you already had there. You definitely want to, capped on tape is really the right stuff for this. I guess in theory you could use electrical tape or something else, but capped on tape is very good at holding on over time in this kind of environment. Electrical tape tends to like wear out over time. Next, we'll reinstall the gimbals, and TBS has very cleverly arranged the studs on the gimbals so you cannot install the wrong gimbal in the wrong location. The studs won't line up. When you reinstall the button, also make sure it goes on the right way around. It's sloping toward the side. Don't put that on backwards. Were they smart enough to prevent you from doing that? Yes. Well, you cannot. It won't go. TBS, you clever monkeys. And we'll reinstall the jog wheel as well. With all this stuff reinstalled, I'm then going to put it back into the case. Oh, these momentary buttons keep wanting to fall off. So, yeah, still looks like it's a little bit in the way. That got it. So yeah, the scroll wheel was not in the right place, and I just kind of pried it out just a little bit with that screwdriver, and everything settled into place. Make sure that you have access to your speaker wire and this ribbon cable, and we're going to need to go back in and reconnect the UFL. My gimbals are falling apart. I'm trying not to, there we go, damage this coax. There we go. Boom. Boom. Fantastic. And finally, we will reinstall these mainboard screws to hold the mainboard down again with a great sigh of relief, because that was kind of a pain in the butt. Oh, frick. The next thing we'll do is we'll plug in the speaker here and reconnect the ribbon cable here. It just snaps down. Before we go on, we'll also take a length of capped on tape. I've cut a fresh piece. You may be able to just reuse what's already there if you don't have it, and we'll just put that over this ribbon cable to help make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And we're going to install this ribbon cable, and we'll do that just by popping up this little connector here, and The ribbon cable is going to go in with the blue side up and the shiny side down. And once it's inserted, we'll just fold that back down again and it will hold it in place. Then I will peel off this dual lock fastener, and it looks like they've switched from this dual lock on the V1 to this dual lock on the V3. So I'm just going to peel off the old dual lock, I guess. Definitely don't want our battery shaking around inside the radio. And I will just install the dual lock here. Is actually the right way to do it. Yeah, so we'll install the dual lock there, and then we'll plug in the battery, and then we'll place the battery. We want the battery resting on these pads, I think. It looks like that's what they're there for. Center it up and press it down. Now I'm going to press on the outside of the pads, so I don't stress the cell. Don't press on the center. I'll just press on the outside here and squeeze down on those pads so it sticks. There we go. Should be pretty good. Turn her on and see if she works.
Welcome to Tango 2. Throttle warning. Switch warning.
Looking good.
Now at this point, if you are installing the V3 mainboard and you are not installing the external module bay, you can skip ahead in the video. There are timestamps, a table of contents down in the video description, and YouTube now shows you those timestamps and chapter markers in the timeline. So you can skip ahead to reassembling the back of the radio. You're also going to need to flash new firmware, which I'm going to show you in this video as well. So don't just leave. Just check those chapter markers and skip ahead. But if you are installing the external module bay, here is what you need to do next. Next, we'll take the back cover of the radio and the multi-protocol module bay adapter, and we will remove this backing from the adhesive. And we'll get that lined up centered and press it down in place. That is never coming off again. That stuff does not fool around. Next thing we need to do is make a hole right here for the ribbon cable to pass through. You use any number of ways you can do that. I'm just going to melt it with my soldering iron tip. I find that melting plastic with a soldering iron tip can oftentimes do a neater job than like grinding or cutting with a Dremel tool. And melting usually leaves a soft edge that is not going to fray or wear on the cable that passes through it. That's kind of sloppy. We can get in there with like a little utility knife and clean that up a little. Well, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but no one's ever going to see it anyway. Now we'll reassemble the radio by putting the back on, and this is the point also where I reinstalled the momentary buttons, which were just falling off the main board. At first, I couldn't get the momentary buttons to actually work again, and I realized you got to kind of push on them a little bit more. They kind of settle and lock into place on the stud. So if your momentary buttons aren't working, just give them a little bit of a push and you may find they go a tiny bit more down in. If you're doing the multi-protocol adapter, you're going to pass the ribbon cable through the hole that you made, and then the whole thing should just go back together. I hope. Yeah, looking good. You'll see what I'm doing here is I'm just checking that it's all coming together right and nothing's in the way. It's always a good idea to do that when this probably isn't your first time reassembling electronics. And we'll reinstall these rubber pads. Oh, so nice to see it coming back together. Okay, almost done. Next, we'll take this board and we will install the ribbon cable. Again, blue side up, insert and click down on the retention tab. And then it's going to install right here, but we're going to want to get rid of this extra ribbon cable. I wonder if we can, like, feed that up in there.
Seems like there's more ribbon cable than we need. Maybe just, oh, yeah, maybe that'll work. I just want to keep it, yeah. You don't want to crimp it or pinch it. Yeah, that's okay. It seems like this method has the least amount of bending of the cable, so that's what I'm going to do. I don't like that it sits near the pins, but I don't think it's going to get damaged by the installation of the module. So that's what I'm going to do. But I don't feel great about it. Once the radio is fully reassembled, give it a good old function check. Make sure that everything still works. And hold
Welcome
on.
to Tango 2. Switch warning.
You're not done yet because you also need to update the firmware. I'm going to put a link to my tutorial about how to update the TBS Tango 2 firmware down in the video description. It's a little bit different than if you've done it with other OpenTX radios. I'm also going to put a couple other links down there for videos you're probably interested in. TBS multi-bind is a thing. If you have more than one radio, you can bind all of your Crossfire receivers to all of your Crossfire radios all at the same time. So if you switch from like your Tango 2 to your Radio Master, you don't have to rebind the models. Well, if you've only got one radio, you may not care about that. But that is the same as the tutorial for getting your TBS Cloud set up. What's TBS Cloud? That is the Wi-Fi related function where your Fusion module, your Crossfire, and your TBS Unify all communicate. So like when you change channels on your Fusion, your Unify follows along or vice versa. Yeah, I'll put links to all that stuff down in the video description if you want to check it out. But that is going to do it for this video. Thank you so much to oh, good. Thank you so I thought it turned off for a minute. Thank you so much to TBS for, number one, for sending me this radio, but number two, for fixing the problems that so many people complained about with the Tango 2. I have to be honest with you. TBS is very steadfast in their belief that what they're doing is the right thing for them. And I have seen cases in the past where people have asked for something and they've been just like, nah, we're not going to do it. We just don't want to do it. And I respect that. But at the same time, I also really appreciate as a user and an enthusiast that I can be way more excited about the Tango 2 than I was, because now I have the option to run my 2.4 gig models on it as well. And I know a lot of you people feel the same way. If you do feel the same way, there are links in the video description to all of the stuff in this video. The Tango 2, if you need the V3 mainboard upgrade, if you need a multi-protocol module, let me just say, if you're thinking about getting a multi-protocol module, don't get the iRange X multi-protocol module because it's been discontinued. But TBS might or might not have something coming soon to replace it that I can't talk about because it's been embargoed. But once it's off embargo, I'll put a link to that video in the video description and a product link. So thank you so much for watching, you guys. Happy flying. Do you see this baby? Isn't he cute? Hit the subscribe button. Join my Patreon. Use my affiliate links. Or just keep watching videos. That's better than nothing.
Google Gaga, subscribe to my daddy.